Picture Beverly Hills in 1993, the Four Seasons lobby crowded with producers in Armani, Oscar winners nursing whiskey. Near the grand piano stands Clint Eastwood, alone, stone-faced, arms crossed, eyes cold and unreadable. Across the room, a young rising actor holds court, loud, charming, full of himself, laughing, name-dropping, spinning a story that ends with a cheap imitation of the old cowboy in the corner. The crowd explodes with laughter. Everyone but Clint. He says nothing, finishes his drink, nods once to the bartender, and walks out without a glance back. No outburst, no confrontation, just a silence, the kind that ends things. 4 years later, Hollywood still whispered about that moment. What did Clint hear? What was said? Why did that actor's name vanish from Warner Brothers casting lists soon after? No one ever found out. Clint never explained. He didn't rant, didn't go to the press, didn't post a word. He erased people quietly, coldly, permanently. Now, at 94, that silence is starting to crack. In a few rare moments of honesty, the legend has revealed a pattern. 5 names, 5 people he never forgave. Those who mocked him, challenged his principles, or assumed he'd forgotten. They didn't merely clash with a filmmaker. They crossed a man who lived by a code and never backed down. First on the list was a documentary firebrand who tried to make his name by ridiculing Eastwood's ideals. It wasn't funny to Clint. He didn't laugh or clap back, he shut it down. The whole thing began as a quip, or at least that's how Michael Moore treated it. At the 2005 National Board of Review Awards, Eastwood said flatly, "Michael Moore and I actually have a lot in common. We both appreciate documentaries, but if he ever shows up at my front door with a camera, I'll kill him." Nervous laughter, a few audible intakes of breath, no wink, no smile from Eastwood. The remark landed like a challenge and the room stayed quiet. This was not a punchline. It was a line drawn. Moore never crossed it again. But that one moment only exposed a deeper split. Moore, then in the midst of creating Fahrenheit 9/11, a savage critique of the Bush era and the post-9/11 war, had already set off alarms for Eastwood. Where Moore saw righteous outrage and screen-grabbing truth, Eastwood saw something else entirely, a spectacle that cheapened sacrifice. By then, Eastwood wasn't just a face on screen. He had just wrapped $1 Million Baby and was preparing to bring Flags of Our Fathers to audiences. Films that treated American service and suffering with solemnity and care, not as fodder for headlines. To Clint, Moore's work felt less like documentary and more like exploitation. Their paths never crossed after that. No collaborations, no shared frames, only a cold distance that began with a single unmistakable warning. If you asked Clint about it today, he'd probably just raise an eyebrow, grunt softly, and steer the conversation elsewhere. Eastwood doesn't do public feuds. He prefers quiet erasure. Michael Moore wasn't the only filmmaker to test his patience. The next confrontation went even further, accusing Clint of whitewashing history on a global stage. Spike Lee, A Battle Over History. Eastwood almost never fires back, but in 2008 he made an exception, and it wasn't subtle. When Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima hit theaters, critics praised the ambitious dual project, 2 sides of the same war, one told through American eyes, the other Japanese. The films were raw, unflinching, and deeply human. But Spike Lee saw something missing. He publicly called out Clint for ignoring the Black Marines who fought and died at Iwo Jima, accusing Flags of Our Fathers of erasing their role. "You can't just pretend they weren't there," Spike said. Clint didn't respond with calm explanation or PR finesse. He shot back with words that sounded straight out of a Western. "A guy like him should shut his face." It wasn't polite. It was explosive. Headlines ignited overnight. Spike fired back. "I'm not going to shut up." He sounds like an angry old man. 4 days later, the feud dominated Hollywood. 2 filmmaking giants. One the stoic cowboy traditionalist, the other the bold provocateur, clashing in a public showdown that laid bare one of the industry's deepest divides. Who gets to tell America's story and from whose point of view? Many tried to explain it away, to soften the edges or decode what Clint really meant, but he never clarified. That silence was the answer. To Eastwood, Flags of Our Fathers, was about a specific group of men, a single story told through a particular lens. He wasn't interested in appeasing critics or filling quotas. He was interested in truth as he saw it. No one, not even Spike Lee, was going to tell him how to make his film. Spike, on the other hand, saw it as something bigger, a matter of responsibility. To him, history wasn't just about who held the camera, but whose stories were left out of the frame. It wasn't merely a disagreement over a movie, it was a clash over meaning, over legacy. With two men as proud, principled, and immovable as Eastwood and Lee, middle ground never existed. They haven't spoken since. No shared panels, no red carpet greetings, no public acknowledgement of each other's work, just a long, cold distance between two filmmaking titans. And if you thought Clint's temper only flared with fellow directors, think again. His next confrontation happened much closer to home, right on his own set, with one of the most famous actors in the world, a man who tested Eastwood's patience and came up short. Leonardo DiCaprio, method versus gunslinger, two icons from different schools of cinema. DiCaprio, the intense, meticulous method actor, chasing emotional depth in every take. Eastwood, the old-school craftsman, valuing instinct, silence, and efficiency. When Clint cast Leo as J. Edgar Hoover in 2011, the industry buzzed, old Hollywood meeting new intensity. But behind the scenes, sparks flew. Friction started on day one. Eastwood's trademark style, one take, minimal rehearsal, no wasted motion, clashed with DiCaprio's layered, process-heavy approach. Clint called it instinct. Leo called it incomplete. What followed was less a collaboration than a quiet, simmering standoff. DiCaprio thrived on exploration, digging, refining, taking multiple takes until he found the emotional heartbeat of a scene. Clint, meanwhile, was already saying, "Cut, move on." While Leo hunted for depth, Eastwood focused on momentum. People on set noticed. Whispers spread through the crew. One insider said it was like watching a racehorse try to run in cowboy boots. There were no shouting matches, no walkouts, just a steady undercurrent of tension between two masters who saw filmmaking from opposite ends of the spectrum. DiCaprio tried to adjust. Eastwood didn't. The movie was finished, released, and then nothing. No second project, no kind words in interviews, no Oscar night acknowledgments. Clint, who often brought back actors he respected, Morgan Freeman, Bradley Cooper, Tom Hanks, never called Leo again. Some said it was creative friction. Others claimed Clint found DiCaprio too intense, too theatrical, maybe even too self-absorbed. Either way, their paths split cleanly, and Eastwood never looked back. But if DiCaprio challenged Clint's control behind the camera, the next man on the list went a step further. He mocked Clint's legacy in front of the entire world, and unlike Leo, he did it publicly. Seth Rogen. Some actors make quiet enemies. Seth Rogen made his loud. In 2014, Clint Eastwood released American Sniper, the story of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. The film divided critics but dominated the box office, becoming a cultural flashpoint. For millions, American Sniper was a patriotic tribute. For Seth Rogen, it was something else entirely. Just days after its release, he fired off a tweet, a throwaway joke that landed like a grenade and left Hollywood stunned. American Sniper kind of reminds me of that movie playing in the third act of Inglourious Basterds. You know, the one where the Nazi sniper is killing Allied soldiers. Rogen didn't mention Clint Eastwood by name. He didn't have to. The implication was atomic, comparing American Sniper to Nazi propaganda. He later claimed it was just a joke, but the fallout had already begun. Clint Eastwood didn't fire back. No tweets, no statements, no interviews. Clint doesn't do social media wars, he does silence. Cold, deliberate silence. Behind closed doors, those close to him said he was furious, not just because of the insult, but because it was done publicly, a drive-by jab disguised as humor. To Eastwood, that wasn't wit. It was cowardice. Although Rogen later clarified he wasn't calling American Sniper Nazi propaganda, the apology never landed. Not in Clint's inbox, and certainly not in his heart. From that moment on, Rogen's name vanished from Clint's world. He never mentioned him again, never entertained the idea of working with him. and reportedly made it clear to studio insiders, if Seth Rogen's name ever showed up on a casting list, it should disappear just as quietly. Because if there's one thing Clint Eastwood doesn't forgive, it's disrespect, especially from someone who hides mockery behind a smile. But the final name on that unspoken list wasn't a comedian or a provocateur. He was a peer, an equal, a co-star, and their rift didn't explode in public. It simmered in silence for years, right under Hollywood's nose. Gene Hackman. On screen, they were electric. Off-screen, they barely spoke. In 1992, Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman came together for Unforgiven, the film that redefined the Western and swept the Oscars. To the world, it looked like a seamless partnership between two legends. But behind those stoic performances, a quiet, stubborn tension was building, one that would test Eastwood's control more than any showdown he'd ever filmed. Clint Eastwood ran a set like a well-tuned watch, calm, precise, built on mutual respect. He valued silence, focus, and control. Gene Hackman, by contrast, was a different kind of force, fiery, unpredictable, a man who thrived on challenge. Eastwood expected discipline. Hackman brought defiance. From the first week of shooting Unforgiven, the friction was palpable. Hackman didn't take direction easily. He'd interrupt Clint mid-instruction, question camera angles, push for rewrites. It wasn't open rebellion, it was pride. One crew member recalled a moment during a crucial scene. Hackman stopped mid-line, turned to Clint, and said, "That line doesn't work. I'm not saying it." Eastwood didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just looked at Hackman for a long moment and replied softly but firmly, "You will." The room went silent. No yelling, no theatrics, just finality. From that point on, the tension hovered over the production like heat on a desert horizon. The two never clashed in public, but their silence was louder than any argument. There was respect between them, but warmth, none. When Unforgiven swept the Oscars, both men walked away as winners, but that was the last time they shared a set. Clint never hired Hackman again, never called him a favorite collaborator, and whenever he reminisced about the film, he'd name Morgan Freeman or Richard Harris, rarely, if ever, Gene Hackman. Those close to the production say the respect was genuine, but the relationship was beyond repair. Too much ego, too much friction, and in Clint's world, that meant one thing, one and done. Hackman would retire from acting not long after, while Eastwood continued shaping his films with precision, choosing his cast and crew carefully. For Clint, chemistry wasn't about star power. It was about trust. And once that trust cracked, it was over. Two legends, one masterpiece, and a silence that never broke. Clint Eastwood never needed to shout to make his point. He didn't rant, didn't gossip, didn't take his grudges to the press. He simply observed, remembered, and when someone crossed the line, he erased them. In a town built on charm and collaboration, Eastwood built his legacy on conviction, unshakable, unapologetic conviction. For 5 people, 5 names etched quietly into Hollywood lore, working with Clint Eastwood wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test. Some failed spectacularly. The question now is yours. Was Clint Eastwood right to keep his silence, or did some of those grudges cross the line? And if you want more hidden stories from Hollywood's golden age, make sure to follow closely. For every name Clint Eastwood quietly erased, there's another he deeply respected. The ones he never forgot, the ones he truly admired, are coming next.